Greetings and salutations. What's up, everybody? Welcome to another edition of the Fighters to Watch series here on Severe MMA. I am Spencer Kyte. Feeling a little better, not sounding as froggy as I was the last couple days. As I say that, I'm sure I'm going to cough here in about 12 seconds and need water throughout. But we'll continue soldiering on as we have throughout this series. And today, we land in the lightweight division, which, while not my pick for the best division in the UFC, that is, of course, the bantamweight division, it is the deepest in terms of overall number of fighters and overall number of fighters that we're going to profile here. And so we're going to get straight into it. Alphabetical order as always, not doing hierarchies or anything like that. A to Z is the easiest way for me to do this. And we start with Yoel Alvarez. He turns 30 on March 2nd. He's 19-3 overall, 4-2 in the UFC. The victories include wins over Joseph Duffy, Alexander Yakovlev, and Thiago Moises. And the losses are to Damir Ismagulov and Arman Tsarukyan. Clearly, this is a talented fighter. Clearly, this is a guy that is just outside the top 15 in that second 15 with the upside to be a top 15 fighter. Incredible length, very good finishing instincts, good submission game. The biggest thing for him is just he needs to stay active. He fought once last year. He fought once the year before that. He's had some weight issues at times. So he is set to face Zubara Tukhugov at UFC 284 in Perth. I love that he's getting an early start again. I love that it's a February fight again. I want to see 3 fights out of Yoel Alvarez this year because I do believe he is the kind of fighter that presents danger in this division. He's a guy that can put people at risk in various different positions. And so if he can get a win over Tukhugov, get back in the win column, kind of cement his place just outside that ranked group, second half of the year, he can get a fight with a ranked fighter and maybe move forward. I liked him going into that fight with Tsarukyan, thought the length would be a problem. Obviously, Tsarukyan proved me wrong and continues to amaze me. We'll talk about him a lot throughout. But Alvarez is the goods. He's talented enough to be in this mix, and we have to just see him regularly in order for that to come to fruition. Next up is Ignacio Bahamondes, as the guys at the gym call him Nacho, 25 years old, 13-4 overall, 2-1 in the UFC, coming off consecutive finishes, both third-round stoppages, one with a wheel kick, one with a Bravo choke. He's extremely intriguing because of his size, his length, the diversity of his skills. He's a Contender Series grad from 2020 where he looked great, right? It was a front kick up the middle that, got Dana out of his seat, understandably got him a contract. Then he lost his debut to John McDessie in a fight where the flaws of his game and the weak points of his game showed through. Despite having a considerable length and reach advantage on John McDessie, he let the Canadian veteran inside, ends up losing a decision. So the keys for him going forward, and this is another one of those long-term prospects that I've been talking about throughout this series. This is talk to me in 3 years when he's had 6 or 8 fights in the UFC, not when he's 25 and has had 3. But it's just develop that fight IQ. Understand how to deploy your weapons better. Continue working with the team that you work with of Valley Flow Striking to figure this stuff out, to get you to a point where you can work from range and use all of that length and all of your height to its optimum. You can optimize those skills, those natural gifts, because they're big potential difference makers in this division. Give him a couple more years, see who he gets matched up with after these consecutive stoppage wins, and let's see where it goes. Brings us to Michael Chandler. The most entertaining fighter in the division is 2-3 overall in the UFC and 1-3 in his last 4. So I don't know that his idea of, hey, I just want to be the guy that puts on entertaining fights is the best idea. Now, it's getting him paid. It's getting him talked about, probably more than just going out and winning fights would. But he's in a weird spot right now. Like, I don't know what you do with Michael Chandler. I have suggested at times, I've talked about it at times on preview shows and takeaways and various platforms, that he feels like he might be one of the few people in the race to face Conor McGregor when he comes back. Now, maybe that would require him moving up to welterweight. He's done it before, I believe, in his Bellator days. Could probably do it again. It would just be a pair of bloated lightweights competing at welterweight. I think that's the kind of fight and the type of assignments he's going to continue to seek out. But I'm not sure. And I'm really, truly curious to see what comes next, because he turns 37 in April. And so there's not a ton of years left. As great shape as he keeps himself in, as maniacal as he is about his conditioning and being in the gym and all of those things, he's been in a ton of battles, and 37 starts to catch up to you at some point. And so I can see him trying to optimize these last couple years and get a couple more big fights in. But he's fought the guys that fit that bill for him thus far at lightweight in Dustin Poirier and Justin Gaethje. Conor is still there. That's a real possibility. But outside of that, I don't know. So we're going to see. One guy I don't want to see him fight is Beneil Dariush, who is next up. 22-4-1 overall, 16-3-1 in the UFC. That feels crazy that it's been that many fights, that it's been 20 fights in the UFC for Beneil Dariush. He has won 8 straight. He is the number one contender. Now, he still may not get the next shot, but he's the number one contender. My notes here, the way I wrote it is saying the only thing that's missing is the charisma and the promo skills. And I think that's what it is, because he's got all the actual skills and all the wins and all the everything else. It's just he wins that fight in Abu Dhabi against Mateusz Gamrot to make it 8 straight, and should come out and say, whoever wins this main event, I've been matched up with each of them at some point in my career and it hasn't come to fruition. I got next. I got the winner. F you, Alex Volkanovski. I've got the winner. And instead he says, hey, I'm just happy to be here. And if I have to win 13 more fights, I'll go out and win 13 more fights. Well, you're going to have to win at least one more, because Volkanovski's fighting for the belt. And as he said to my colleague Gavin Porter over at UFC.com this week, sitting around and waiting becomes a risk, because you don't know how things are going to work out. And if Volk wins, is he trying to defend 2 belts and it becomes December before you're fighting? He doesn't want that. And so it becomes a matter of getting out there and speaking what you want. And there should only be 2 names, Charles Oliveira and Dustin Poirier. That's it. Anyone else, you're setting yourself up to go backwards. And I don't want to see him go backwards. He merits an opportunity. I'm trying not to use the word deserves anymore. He merits a championship opportunity. I hope he gets it this year. Next up, Mike Davis, 8-2 overall. 10-2 overall. 3-1 in the UFC. 3-0 at lightweight. So his debut was at welterweight on short notice against Gilbert Burns. We're throwing that one out. Doesn't count. Short notice, Gilbert Burns, wrong weight class. Give my guy a break. He's got good size. He's got good power. He's toolsy. Like, if you think about other sports and the way we talk about athletes in other sports, he's a toolsy guy. He can box really well. He can wrestle a little bit. He's got good size, good length, all of these things. The key for Mike Davis is health. Plain and simple. It sounds trite when people say it, but the best ability, easy for me to say, is availability. If you can't be out there even if it's every 6 months, even if you fight twice a year, great. You stay somewhat fresh in people's minds. But in a division like this, if you can't fight every 5-6 months and you're going long stretches where you're not competing, it doesn't matter how many wins you rack up or how good you are. There's going to be a bunch of people that pass you over simply because you're inactive, simply because while you're on the sidelines recuperating and healing up, they're picking up 2 wins to leapfrog you in the rankings. Needs to stay healthy, needs to be active. Coming off a good win over Slavoclaus, needs to be out there in Q1, at the absolute worst Q2. Or else it's right back to, man, he could be good, but doesn't fight enough. Brings me to Grant Dawson, who for me is one of the best prospects in the UFC, as I talked about on OSDB Sports earlier this week, and is one of my dark horses in this division. He's a guy that I think can be in the top 10 by the end of this year. There's nothing about Grant Dawson that jumps off the page, right? He's not supreme physique. He's not crazy athlete. He's not a big trash talker. IG game isn't crazy, like nothing. He's just a really goddamn good fighter. He's 19-1-1 overall, 7-0-1 in the UFC, won his last 2, submitting Jared Gordon and Mark Madsen in 2022, both in the 3rd round. He's just, like I said, he's just a good fighter. He's just a really good fighter. He seems to be addressing some of the conditioning issues, some of the maintaining that cardio issues that plagued him at different points. Especially we saw it in the Ricky Glenn fight. I know he missed weight for the last one, but it was short notice. It was a very quick turnaround opportunity against Mark Madsen. So I don't think it's going to be an issue at 55 the way it was at 45 where he started. And if it isn't, and if he continues developing, working with the crew at American Top Team where he is now, he can be in the top 10 before the year is out. He's going to get a good name for his next assignment. It's going to be somebody with a number next to their name that we are well aware of. And if he wins that one, a lot more people are going to be talking about this kid that turns 29 in February and is unbeaten in the UFC and is unbeaten in the division and just keeps finishing fools. It's really good. Pay close attention to Grant Dawson this year. If you take nothing else away from today's video, please let it be that you pay attention to Grant Dawson this year. Next up, and maybe he doesn't merit being here, but it's Mark Kakheti. 30 years old in March, 16-6 overall, 7-6 in the UFC. He had 2 nice bounce back wins in 2022. Used his wrestling, went back to the roots. And then he fought a stupid fight against Michael Johnson. Then he went back to being showy and flashy and trying to do too much and not wrestling. And he lost. And it cost him. The talent is there. The diversity of skills, the power, the wrestling, the athleticism, the strength, all of those things are there and are really high end. But Kakheti is a perfect example of it doesn't matter if all that stuff is there. If the fight IQ and the execution aren't there, right? He and Grant Dawson being back-to-back in this is perfect to me. Because if you look at them on paper or side by side, Mark Kakheti is the guy that should be the potential top 10 fighter. Ticks all the athletic boxes. Grant Dawson, not as much. But Grant Dawson knows who he is as an athlete, knows who he is as a fighter, and just plays to that. He's not out there looking to try to strike with you because he's not a striker. Mark Kakheti can strike, does strike, has some good, right? We all remember the Timu Pakalin Street Fighter combo. But at his roots, he's a grappler and a guy that uses that explosive athleticism to dictate terms of engagement and hit big, impactful, dynamic level changes. He might not ever be the guy that we want him to be. And especially we here at Severe MMA, right? We talk about him regularly. We're fans of Mark Kakheti. We want good things for him. It may never come. I hope that loss to Michael Johnson resets him back to who he was in beating Slava Borshev and in beating Damir Hadzovic last year. One guy who certainly knows who he is and is true to himself each and every time he steps into the cage is Mr. Drew Dober. He's won 3 straight. They're all finishes. They're all fun. He is one of the top all-action fighters in the UFC right now. Like, if you're making a pound-for-pound list of the best all-action fighters, Drew Dober is on that list. He's probably in the top 10, maybe even the top 5. A couple of years ago, he stood on the mic and said, look, I turned down a bunch of fights that I thought would be boring because I don't want to be in boring fights. I want challenges. I want problems. He called out Jalen Turner after beating Bobby Green, and I would watch that 497,000 times. And to his credit, Jalen Turner posted a great GIF as a response on Twitter, which I think meant, yeah, I'm in for this. So we could get that fight in a few months, and I would absolutely adore it. Geek out about it before we get going there. But Drew Dober is just, he's decided, and it's a risky proposition. It's sort of the same decision that Michael Chandler has made, except without abandoning any of his actual tools, right? He said, I want to go out and be in entertaining fights. I want to go out and be in challenging, competitive fights. That doesn't mean he's not going to wrestle when the time, when it's called for. We saw him try to do it with Islam Makhachev. He's going to strike primarily, and it's going to lead to some situations like the Bobby Green fight where he was getting pieced up. But he's got that crack in his shots, and he can find a left hand, and he can put you away, and he's going to just keep being entertaining. And I'm always going to be here and advocating for people to watch entertaining fighters. Watch Drew Dober. Watch every single fight of his. I don't care who the opponent is. If it gets changed out last minute and you don't know the guy, watch the fight. Drew Dober will do cool stuff. It will be a fun fight. Next up is Michael Figlak, 26-year-old. He will be a sophomore when he makes his second trip into the UFC. He's Cage Warriors grad. He lost his debut to Fares Zayem. He is, to me, a perfect example, again, of let's just wait and see. He did well in Cage Warriors, right? The loss was his first loss, I believe. I can't remember officially. I don't have it written down here for me in my notes. That's a mistake by me. But he did well in Cage Warriors, and everybody here that has seen him tells me that that performance in his debut isn't quite representative of who he is. And so let me see the second fight. Let me see the third fight. Let me see the fourth fight. And then we'll figure it out. Then we'll start having an actual sample size to look at. And look, if it gets to 0-2, 0-3, we don't need a fourth fight. I advocate for it all the time. There are times that we don't need 2, 3, 4 fights to make our decisions. But I don't think the loss to Fares Zayem was so bad that it tells me he can't hang here. And the Cage Warriors time tells me that he probably can. So let's get him a couple fights this year and see where he fits in. Brings us to Raphael Assuncao. Turns 30 in March, 12-1 overall, 6-1 in the UFC, and won his last 6. He's a gnarly challenger that not a lot of people are keen on fighting. And when I talked to him before his fight with Raphael dos Anjos, he said as much. He said, look, I've been calling out these guys ahead of me for the last couple fights. None of them want to fight me. There's always something, right? I'm waiting for this. I'm waiting for that. My butt hurts, whatever. His words, not mine. Go look it up. It's in the article, UFC.com. Search the byline. He needs a top 5 opponent. He needs Justin Gaethje. He needs Dustin Poirier. He needs Michael Chandler. Because anybody else is burning somebody that has merited a spot in that top 5, in that upper tier, at the expense of, or by skipping these guys that are just hanging out fighting each other. And we got to get away from it. The one I want to see is Gaethje. That's the one I want, because they'll just get out there and throw, right? Like Fiziev is the perfect dance partner for Gaethje. You want to just throw wrestling out the door and stand in here and strike? Great. I hope it happens. I hope it comes together. And Justin Gaethje is our next fighter anyway. So let's just move forward to him. He lost to Charles Oliveira in May. Hasn't fought since. 1-2 over his last 3. And he's just hanging out. He's just hanging out. I don't think he can continue to hang out. I think he needs to win more than one in order to get a championship opportunity, because we have a new champion and because he's lost to Charles Oliveira, who is still ahead of him in the queue. And so Fiziev makes the most sense, right? Don't need to see him against Poirier again. Don't need to see him against Chandler again. Don't want to see him against Beneil Dariush. Fiziev makes sense. Fiziev, Mateusz Gamrot. Sure. Somebody there. But he's got to fight. And so it's going to be really interesting to see what the UFC does, what he opts to do in this first half of 2023. Because he can't go another year not fighting. Right? He lost, as I said, to Oliveira in May. And so for me, my opinion, you got to get back out there before we hit a year of Justin Gaethje sitting on the sidelines. Because as entertaining as you are, as established as you are, this division doesn't stop moving. And as much as people love you and are willing to see you win one and fight for a title, that's going to change at some point when more and more of these emerging talents push forward and say these things, right? We're hearing Fiziev talk about it. We've heard Arman Tsarukyan talk about it. They're not going to stop. It's not like these guys are suddenly going to stop saying it's horseshit that the Justin Gaethjes and Michael Chandlers of the world just hang out here and fight each other and think, I win one and I get a title shot. At some point, I would think they're going to have to get back into the mix in order to actually get back into the mix. There's some tasty options. We better get one of them. Brings us to Mateusz Gamrot, 32 years old, 21-2 with 1 no contest overall, 4-2 in the UFC, lost his debut by split decision. It was really close. Won a unanimous decision in a close fight this year against Arman Tsarukyan, or last year. See, I told you I would do it. I'll do it at least once a video. Pretend that it's still 2022. And then lost a competitive fight with Beneil Dariush in Abu Dhabi. He is cemented in the top 10 for me. He just needs to make a couple adjustments. Like the fight with Dariush was just about in-fight adjustments. Benny made them. Gamer didn't. That's how it played out. Is he going to be a champion? I'm not 100% sure. I think he has the skills. He has the talent. It would be there's a world where he is. There's a world where he can get there. Things line up right. Different people win and lose in combinations. Certainly. What I do know for sure is that he is terrific in that 4-8 range where you're fighting other really good fighters and the up and coming kid that is trying to get into that upper tier. It's not the job that everybody wants. It's not necessarily the one anybody goes into this seeking out, but I go to my constant reference. Jeremy Stephens had a hell of a good run at featherweight being that dude. And so if at some point it becomes mostly clear that you're not going to get to the title or it's going to take a bit, it's not a bad place to settle in. Hang out at number 6, good fights, 2-3 fights a year. If you put together the right wins, getting a title shot, always in the conversation for interim titles if they come up, like it's a good spot to be. Gamer should have success there. Really interested in seeing who he gets to start his 2023 campaign. Which brings us to the man that is constantly missing in action, Gregor Gillespie. He rallied to win his last appearance against Diego Ferreira after a long layoff, and now he's on another long layoff. We never hear why he's away. We never get like actual, hey, Gregor wants to take another year. He's dealing with this injury. He's dealing with this family thing. He just disappears. And then he pops back up, reminds us that he's really goddamn good. And we think, man, it'd be great if this guy was around and fighting, because he's 14-1 overall and 7-1 in the UFC. But like, he may never fight again. And it would be as believable to me that he never fights again as it is that he fights twice this year. I have no idea what to expect. He turns 36 in March, so he's getting towards the end of that competitive window. So if he wants to make a run, if this is something that he wants to do, I think we have to see him back. But I've been saying that for, since the fight with Fahea. Stick around. You're in the mix. Everybody loves you. Everybody wants to see you compete. Will we? I don't know. I have no idea. No clue. Like I said, he could never fight again, and it wouldn't surprise me. I think I would be more surprised if he fought twice this year. Truthfully. Which is wild to say about a super talented fighter in this division. We move on to Guram Kakheti, who turns 31 tomorrow. So happy birthday. 12-2 overall, 1-1 in the UFC. Pair of split decisions. Happy side against Gamrot. Not so happy side against Damir Ismagulov. Good size, good kicks, well-rounded. Another one of these ascending Georgian talents. Just needs opportunities. He was scheduled to fight Thiago Moises later this month in Brazil at UFC 283. Had to withdraw from that. And that's the problem, right? That's the hiccup for him. That's the hurdle that he needs to clear. We haven't seen him enough. It hasn't been, and some of that is certainly visa issues at times, but some of that is just availability. As I've said earlier, best ability is availability. I don't know if he needs to do the Roman Dolidze thing and move to the States and set up shop in Vegas so that some of this stuff is easier and he can be available and be at the PI and be in North America for some of these North American dates. Maybe he's already done that and I'm not aware, and this is just an injury and such is life. But he needs to get out there. We need to see him more than once a year. He's too talented. He's too skilled. He's still too much of a question mark for us to go year by year with just a single fight. Because next thing you know, he'll be 35 and we still won't really know. And we'll be like, if he could ever just, you don't want to get to that point. Hopefully it gets figured out. Hopefully we see him a couple of times this year and we can get a better read on him. Because I'm still not sure. I like him. I like the talent. The talent is there. I like the potential. Just need to see it. Dan Hooker is next. 22-12 overall, 12-8 in the UFC. And you know what? I don't give a shit what his record is. I don't care. Dan Hooker is someone you always watch. Like Drew Dober, someone you always watch. He's back at lightweight where he belongs. He's still a top 15 guy to me. Just because he lost a bunch of fights there at one point doesn't mean anything. Look at who he fought. Sometimes you have to look at who someone fought rather than just the results. They tell us a lot. Dan Hooker is in that camp. We learned on Friday that he has a fight coming up. We don't know who it is. My guess, if I was playing Crystal Ball, would be Hanato Moyo, because that just seems like way too much fun to not do at this point. Because that's where both of them sort of are at. So Dan played the veteran litmus test to Claudio Penas in his last appearance, showed him that he's not ready, got himself back into the win column, came on the show, came on a conversation with, which was great. Find it on the YouTube page if you haven't watched it already. Thank you again to the Hangman for doing that. They're both sort of in that spot. And maybe this is hey, there can only be one. So let's have you fight each other. It'll be fun no matter what. And whoever wins gets to be the call out guys for fun action fights. I'm down. I'm down for every Dan Hooker fight. You should be as well. Get on board. Pay attention to Dan Hooker. Enjoy all of his fights. Thank me later. Next up, this is a question mark. It's Damir Ishmagulov, 5-1 in the UFC. He lost his last time out to Arman Tsarukyan and announced very recently that due to health issues, he has to step away from the sport. First and foremost, health is most important. So I hope whatever the issue is, it is not life-threatening. It is something treatable and curable, and something that doesn't impact his overall quality of life going forward. Beyond that, I hope, and this is just me speaking as a fan of his work and his skills inside the octagon, if possible, if the health things can get sorted out, I hope he's able to return, because it would be unfortunate to lose him. I think we saw in the fight with Arman Tsarukyan just how good he is, even though it was a loss. It was one of those situations where you're like, oh, he's hanging with this dude that we think really highly of and's ranked in the top 10. I think he's really legit. He is. And so if he can get the health things sorted out, I'd love to see him back. I'd love to see him be able to resume his career, but the health is first and foremost. So get well, Damir. All the best to you. Hope, as I said, I hope it's nothing serious. Brings us to the champ, Islam Makhachev, 23-1 overall, 12-1 in the UFC, and won 11 straight. The last 5 via finish. As we all know by now, he is facing Alexander Volkanovski for the lightweight title at UFC 284 in Perth, Australia next month. He could be positioned for a real long reign. And I know we say that with most people that ascend to the throne in any weight class. We do the like, oh, could this be the start of? This could be the start of the Makhachev era. He's that good. Like, you don't go out and do what he did to Charles Oliveira and then have me come here and not be like, this guy's really good and he could really lord over this division for a long ass time. Right. And it's not MMA math based. You can go that route if you want to. He did to Oliveira and Oliveira did to all the people before him. It's not even that. Just watch, just look, just see it. He, for all the years that people thought it was wild or maybe just hyperbole, maybe just his team hyping him up and blowing smoke, saying he's next, right? When Khabib's out of the way, now Khabib's gone. It's Islam. It's Islam. He's that fucking good. He can do a bunch of the Khabib stuff. And he fights, as Harry often talks about. It is go out and win the fight and then do the fun stuff. As it turns out, he's able to do the fun stuff relatively quickly while winning the fight. He's insanely good. I can't wait to see the fight with Volk. It is on my top 10 fights I want to see this year, which will be coming out on OSTB Sports on Tuesday. The full list, the complete list. This one's happening. I can't wait till February. There's a bunch of stuff before it that I'm interested in, but that right now is Q1, biggest circle. Let's go. He could win. He could hold on to this belt for a number of years. He's that good. Next up, Conor McGregor. Should probably be listed in the welterweight division, but he's here because when I went through the list, he was listed as a lightweight. His last couple fights were at lightweight, so here we are. There's still no timetable for his return that I know of. And as far as I know, he still needs to get back into the USADA testing pool because right now he looks like he probably couldn't fight at welterweight. Probably have to fight at 85. He looks gigantic. I have no clue who he's going to fight. There's all kinds of different options. There's all kinds of different avenues they could go with this, both Conor and the UFC or jointly. But he has to be included because it's Conor. And whenever he comes back, whoever he fights, it's going to be a really big deal. There's potential questions in terms of like, what can he do after a win? What happens after a loss that we're going to have to address this year? I'm going to continue to take the stance I always take on Conor McGregor. And that is, I won't discuss him too much until he has a fight booked, because I think we at times spend a lot of time talking about people that aren't around and ignoring people that are. But I can't go through this list and I can't go through this division and not mention the former champion, still the biggest name in the sport, the biggest draw in the sport. The fact that those things are both true, and they are true and unchallengeable, tells you why he's on this list. We'll see what happens when he comes back. As I mentioned earlier, I think Michael Chandler is an option. I would be fine with that fight. I think he may try to see if there's another Dustin Poirier fight, and I think Dustin would be open to that fight. I think Tony Ferguson is a possibility. We'll see. We'll see what happens. Lots of questions. We will hear a lot about and from Conor McGregor this year, but you won't hear about it from me until the contract is signed. Next up is Terence McKinney, 28 years old, 13-4 overall, 3-1 in the UFC. Just an absolute ton of upside. Needs to dial it in, though. The Drew Dober fight, which is his loss in the UFC, is the fight that, for me, we need to focus on. The wins are great. Don't get me wrong. The wins are great. But that fight where he had Drew Dober in a real bad way is the thing to focus on. Because if he can dial in some of that energy and effort that he put out trying to finish and unsuccessfully trying to finish Drew Dober, and pull that back to where he's picking his shots a little better and he's not throwing the same step forward knee a bunch of times, then maybe he finishes Drew Dober and he's in a completely different position right now at the start of 2023 than he is, which is fighting Israel Bonfim at UFC 283 in Brazil. So like, you go from nearly beating Drew Dober and taking that fight on really short notice, getting back into the win column, and now facing a debutante in Brazil on his home turf. I appreciate the willingness to do it. I like that he's getting a fight in January, which means we hopefully will see 2 or 3 more. He could be a top 10 talent. The overall skill package, the overall talent package is good enough for him to get there. But he's got to dial it in. It's got to get tightened up. And if it does, he's a problem. Next up is Uroš Medic, 30 years old in April, 8-1 overall, 2-1 in the UFC. Another one of these all-action guys, right? Contender Series grad, cut a great promo. This is why they call me the doctor. They make them go see the nurse. It was great. He's had some good performances. He's had some fun fights. Lost to Jalen Turner, which is, Jalen Turner's a killer, it turns out. But he needs to stay healthy. This is another guy in this division and in this sport and in this promotion. Got to stay healthy. Got to be able to fight. Because you can just miss so many opportunities. And the best years of your career can go by because you're unable to compete. That's a sad reality. It's an unfortunate reality. But he's missed a couple fights already because he hasn't been able to be healthy. He's got good size. He's got good skills. He works with a good team at King's MMA. Get healthy, stay healthy. And some guys are just injury prone. Some guys just have terrible luck. Hopefully he gets healthy. Hopefully he stays healthy. And we see some more of these fun fights because he's a finisher. Everything is finishes. Win or loss, we're not needing the judges. Love guys like that. Love fighters like that. Got to stay healthy in order to be in there doing those things. Brings us to Hanato Moyo, Money Moyo. What a way to close out the year for Money Moyo. Just shouting all kinds of curse words into the microphone about money, about I'm here, MF and everybody. Like, my guy is just living his best life now. Showed up last year, showed us, though, exactly where he sits. Just kind of outside that top 15. Very much a second 15 guy. Because the wins were great, but when he turned up on short notice, and sure, yes, fair. It's short notice against RDA. He got housed. And RDA is now back up at welterweight because it's easier for him than cutting weight. But he got housed. And so that's probably the ceiling. That's probably an indication of how far he can go. But there's a whole ton of really fun, entertaining fights. Like if he is facing Dan Hooker, God, that's going to be fun. You telling me you're not excited about that? UFC 285, Vegas, those two kicking off the main card. Let's go. Sign me up. Winner gets to keep being this guy. Perfect. Love it. Do more of it. Brings us to Thiago Moises, 28 years old at the end of March, 16-6 overall, 5-4 in the UFC, but I'm throwing an asterisk on it. And here's why. The men that have beaten Thiago Moises inside of the octagon are Beneil Dariush, Damir Ismagulov, Islam Makhachev, and Joel Alvarez. His 4 losses are to 4 athletes that are the champion, the number 1 contender, and 2 guys that are just outside the top 15. If you want to hold that against him and say he's a scrub or say he's this, that, or the other, go right ahead. It's your prerogative. It's your life. Form whatever opinions you want. It's not one that I'm going to hold. I still think he can have some upside in this division. The win over Christos Giagos last time out and the way he hooked up the finish to get the neck crank, the rear naked choke, whatever you want to call it, was lovely, was beautiful. As I mentioned earlier, he was supposed to fight Guram Kakheti at UFC 283. That fell through. Hopefully he gets rebooked sometime still in Q1 so we can see him 2 or 3 times. We can see if he makes a little bit of a run here. I think he's capable of it. Just needs the opportunity. Just needs the chance. And to not be the guy that gets thrown in there after 2 wins with the guy that's a little bit better than him and a little bit ahead of him that just needs a stay active fight. We'll see. Next up, the former champion, Du Bronx, Charles Oliveira. Really curious just to see what comes next for him. Obviously still a top contender. Seems like the kind of guy that could maybe just take fun fights. Like I'm sure he'll be trying to posture and position for Conor McGregor. I don't think that's a fight that Conor McGregor would take or wants particularly. There's not as many fresh matchups as you think because he was champion and he worked his way forward, but there's still some. I do think he's going to continue to take a little break. I know there was a point at one point where there was talk and rumors that he was going to be on the 283 card in Brazil. That didn't materialize. I think that's for the better. At some point this year, though, I want to see him fight Arman Tsarukyan. That's on my top 10 list. It's coming out next week. I want to see that fight. I want to see that fight to determine who fights for the title next in 2024. That's what I want to see. That'd be a whole lot of fun. Brings us to the most talented and most talked about average lightweight in the UFC, Paddy Pimblett. Listen, even if you scored the last fight for him, even if you scored that fight with Jared Gordon for him, which you absolutely can, you still can't be all that pumped about the effort. It's not like you can come away from that and be like, yep, this guy is going to be, no, you come away from that where we've been here at Severe MMA for the duration of Paddy Pimblett's UFC run, which is he's entertaining, he's charismatic, and he is absolutely limited. People are going to get mad at this. I'm sure of it, especially at Barstool if they ever hear this, which shouts to Robbie Fox and no one else. He's the lightweight male version of Molly McCann. He's probably a little better than Molly is, but like it's not orders of magnitude better. Really fun, easy to root for. Seems like a good person when he's, focused on the right things. When you see the good side of him, there's some good stuff, but there's some scummy stuff too. And he's not as good a fighter as a lot of people think. He's not as good a fighter as the Barstool crew thinks, or the people that just saw him in the UFC think. And he's going to get matched up. He's going to end up on that London card probably. And it's going to be real interesting to see who the UFC puts him in with. Because same as after every fight. It can go one of two ways. It can be another Paddy should win this fight, or they can finally give him a test. I'd like to see him get the test. I don't really want to spend another year doing this shit where we got to just, people are talking about him like he's going to be a contender, because he's not going to be. And as always, if I'm wrong, right back here, tell you I'm wrong. Apologize profusely. We spend too much time on this dude for him being not that good. We need to talk about actual quality, talented, ascending fighters, not guys that are 27, 28 that people think are still prospects when they're not. That's the last I'll say about Paddy. I will move to Dustin Poirier, who in my opinion can call his own shot, save for demanding a title shot, which is something he wouldn't do anyways. He understands his position in the ecosystem and where he's at career-wise. Turns 34 in a couple of weeks. Good effort against Michael Chandler to get that win. He's fought everybody. This all just depends on what he's looking to do in these next couple of years. And as I said, take your pick. You want to do another fight with Conor? Sold. You want to get back into the mix and accept that you've got to go through some of these up-and-comers and established guys in this division? Great. I'm in for it. There's a lot of fun fights. You want to move up to welterweight or pick and choose some opponents? Cool. Let's go. You're not going to hear me say no to any Dustin Poirier fight. He's great. And he understands. And the reason I say I won't say no is because he's not going to be that guy that just comes out and is like, great, I want Islam now. Because he knows. I've had a couple opportunities and they didn't go well. And they're not going to give me another one. He's joked about it online. It's why he's amazing. It's why he's great. And so we'll see what he decides to do once he gets healthy, once he gets back rolling, once he gets ready to come back. Pick his shot. Going to be fun. Let's see where he goes. Next up is Claudio Penas, 27 years old in April, 12-3 overall, 5-2 in the UFC. Still young, still time to grow and develop, but he certainly needs to. We saw that in the Dan Hooker fight. Right now, he's pretty one-dimensional. And that dimension is, if I can get you on the ground, I can attack your leg. It's not even I can work for various other submissions. It's strictly I'm a leg lock guy, which worked out fine in a couple of fights. Clay Guida, Chris Grutzmacher. Put Dan Hooker in some tricky positions, forced him to be aware and make smart choices in that fight. But even Ryan Hall, who is amazing at this stuff, only reached a certain level, having that as his lead weapon. And so Poyas needs to take a little step back. He got the let's have the veteran test. Failed. Great. Move back. Let's see if he can add some pieces to that leg lock game, to that grappling acumen, and find a way to move forward in 2023. Next up, as the power kind of flickers here at Casa de Kyte, which is always scary as we're taping videos for the internet, is Benoit Saint Denis, who is a member of Team Spencer, is an all-action guy, 27 years old, 10-1 with 1 no contest, 2-1 in the UFC, 2-0 since returning to this division. Made his debut up in weight against Elizeu Zaleski dos Santos in a fight you all remember. Should have been stopped way earlier than it was. Actually didn't get stopped. I believe it went the distance, if I'm not mistaken. Took a hell of a lot of damage, hell of a lot of punishment. He still takes a lot of punishment. And that's the note I have. His upside is limited because he gets hit too much. But he should still continue to be in fun fights. And I know that's a tough thing to hear and to say and to think about. But it is what it is. It's the reality we accept. as fans and as observers and media members and analysts surrounding and covering this sport. These guys take punishment, and it has lasting impact. And as Harry talked about after his last fight, his upside and his longevity is way reduced because of that fight with Dos Santos and the way he competes. I still want to see him fight. I still want to see him out there. I hope Harry's wrong. I hope that he builds up some sturdier defense. These are the hard realities that we have to deal with as we cover this sport. Move on to Manuel Torres, 28 at the end of March, 13-2 overall. Won his UFC debut, member of the Dana White Contender Series class of 2021. KO'd Frank Camacho in his debut, which is a good win. It's a good win. Those are the kind of wins that make me sit up and go, all right, let's see the sophomore outing. Because if you come out and you beat a guy like Frank Camacho, that's a veteran, that's been in there, that's got some pop, that previously has been at times tough to put away, that makes me interested to see what the second fight and the third fight and the further development is. Not quite as long-term a prospect because he's 28 at the end of March. So the window of opportunity to get this rolling and make those developments and improvements, we're already starting to get into that stage where they needed to be made. Doesn't mean he doesn't have time. He still has time, but it needs to be hastened a little. So we'll see who he gets next. We'll see what the second fight is, and we'll go from there. We'll make assessments as we see them. 3 guys left. First of those 3 is Arman Tsarukyan. I really do think he can be champion at some point. Had a great bounce back effort against Damir Ismagulov in Orlando, Florida. Thought he beat Mateusz Gamrot. Thought he won that fight. Rematch with Makhachev at some point has to happen. Like, we knew from that fight, from that debut, that he was really good. We didn't quite know how good because we didn't know at that time just how good Islam Makhachev is, but good Lord, did that performance age well. And if he keeps adding little pieces and rounding out his game a little bit more each time, not only is he going to be a top 10 fixture as he is now, he is going to be a championship discussion fixture, if not a UFC champion. He is the goods. He is the genuine article. He should get one of these A+ names next time out. And if he wins that, he should fight for gold. I don't want this to turn into needs to win 3 more. He's done enough. Let's see what the next one is. And it should be somebody super talented ahead of him in the pecking order. And then we'll go from there. He's terrific. I lied earlier prior to this one. Now we are at 3 fighters left. There's 1 fighter on another page that I didn't remember. So now we are at 3 fighters left. And the first of those is Jalen Turner, who could be a nightmare real soon. Real soon. Turns 28 in May. 13-5 overall, 6-2 in the UFC. Won 5 straight. They're all finishes. One of those losses was short notice up a weight class against Vicente Luque. So we chucked that one out. Doesn't really register for me because it's up a division against Vicente Luque on short notice, which makes him 6-1 in the UFC. I mean, he's got all the things you want. Size, power, finishing instincts. All of his wins are finishes. Plus, he's a guy, and the note I have is that he's been around for a minute. So I remember first hearing about Jalen Turner when he was training with the crew at Jackson Wink years ago, like 7-8 years ago. And then being like, we've got this kid. He's long. He's gangly. We're not quite sure. Here we are. He's turning into a nightmare. Drew Dober called him out and said, he is a problem and I want those problems. Drew Dober is correct. I want him to get those problems, as I said earlier. And if Jalen Turner goes out and beats Drew Dober, especially if he beats them in the manner that he beat Jamie Malarkey or beat Brad Riddell, heaven forbid, we need to start talking about this dude as a contender, not just as a like, oh, when he puts it, he goes out and beats Drew Dober. If that fight comes together and he goes out and beats Drew Dober like that, finishes Drew Dober, top 10 and room to grow, room to continue climbing. God, I want to see that fight. Next up, Fares Zayem, 26 in March, 13-4 overall, 3-2 in the UFC. Good win over Michael Figlak in Paris in September. Still developing, still figuring it all out. Love his size, love his length. He is, again, another one of these young fighters that we need to just give him a little bit more time. Similar to Nacho Bahamondes, right? Big, long, tall, has to figure out how to use it. He's getting there. Lost to Terence McKinney to start last year. Rebounded with the win over Figlak. He is Harry's pick for Paddy Pimblett's next opponent. I think that's a really good shout, actually. I think it's still a good test for Paddy because of the length, because of the grappling ability. He's got a little bit of crispness to his hands, as we saw in that fight in Paris. I still think it will be either Matt Frivola or my all-time forever pick to face Paddy Pimblett, Jamie Malarkey. But Ziem is somebody to continue to keep an eye on. He's a little bit away. He's a few steps behind in terms of like where he is in the rankings and stuff. But there's talent there. There's upside. Don't sleep on him. That's all I'm saying. Don't sleep on him. Last one before we get out of here. Daniel Zellhuber, the Golden Boy, 23 years old, 12-1 overall, lost his UFC debut. Member of the Contender Series class of 21. He was beaten by a more experienced, sort of more developed fighter in Trey Ogden in his debut. And if you watch that fight, it's again, similar to Ignacio Bahamondes against John McDessie, where he's not really fully understanding, hey, I've got this big, long reach advantage and this kicking advantage that I can just throw shots at this guy and he can't get inside and he's got to deal with the volume. There was no volume. If he figures out that part, that's a great first step. There's still a ton of upside. Perfect example of one of these kids that comes off Contender Series that probably isn't really ready to be at this level, but you can develop by getting him reps. I'm a huge basketball guy. One of the things I love seeing, and I think smart teams do, smart organizations do, is they get their young players reps. They don't just stick them on the bench. And so let's take a team like the New Orleans. We're going all over the board on this. New Orleans Pelicans drafted a kid named Dyson Daniels, 8th overall this past draft. He's a kid, played in Australia last year, tons of upside, still a little raw, but there's flashes every time he plays. That if you just get this guy some reps so that he learns and he gets a feel for the speed of the game and the pace of the game and how everybody moves, he'll get to where he needs to be quicker. And so with Zellhuber and a bunch of these other younger athletes that we've talked about throughout this look at the lightweight division, get them in there getting reps. And the coaches need to do their part and say, look, these are the strengths that you bring to the table. These are the pluses. Use them, work with them, go forth and have success. But let's get him those reps. And then in 2 years, check in and see where he's at. Because there's promise, there is upside, there is potential, but it's got to be cultivated. It's got to be nursed. It's got to be nurtured. It can't just be, hey, you have all these weapons, figure it out. Get him the reps, get him the experience, get him some playing time, and let's see what it gets to. That's it for the lightweights. We are more than halfway through our look at the fighters to watch for 2023. Tomorrow, we move to the welterweight division. And then we've only got 3 left after that, which will bring us into the first fight week of the year when we'll start doing some of the regular series that you know me for from last year. 1 question for every fight, 10 things I like, debut of a new betting show. Just giving you a little tease on that. Not giving you any of the details yet. Debut of a new betting show and prediction show. We'll still be on Fridays here on the YouTube, but it will be new. It will be improved. Hope you will enjoy it. I think you'll enjoy it. But for now, I say thank you. Love you. I appreciate you. Be good to yourselves. Be good to one another. Support all the boys. Check them out on Twitter. Follow the Patreon. Sign up for the Patreon, severemma.com/pints. The best URL in the business. Enjoy all of the content. Enjoy the weekend. We'll talk to you soon.